His phone wouldn't stop buzzing in his chest pocket, the vibration sharp against his ribs like a warning he didn't want to hear. Ethan Hayes stood ankle-deep in wet leaves, staring at the base of a giant oak that looked wrong up close. Not broken. Not storm-damaged. Just lived in. A thin thread of smoke slipped out from a crack in the bark, not the smoky smell of a campfire, but the sour sting of burnt instant noodles. He lifted the yellow caution tape he'd tied earlier that morning and leaned in. From inside the tree, a woman's voice said, calm and tired, "If you're here to kick me out, at least let me put my shoes on first." Ethan froze. He could hear the rattle of a cheap phone charger against wood, like someone had a whole life packed into a space that shouldn't exist. Ethan worked as a ranger at Larrabee State Park outside Bellingham, Washington, the kind of place people posted about when they wanted to look like they had their life together. Old-growth trees. Fog that made everything feel softer. Families in matching rain jackets taking pictures by trail signs. Couples holding hands like they were the first two humans to ever discover a view. Ethan loved the park the way you love something you can't afford to mess up. It was steady. It followed rules. It didn't ask him to explain why he was 36 and splitting custody of a 7-year-old in a 2-bedroom rental that smelled like somebody else's cooking. His schedule was a rotating mess. Early shifts. Late shifts. Weekends he didn't get to choose. And a constant low hum of emails about budget cuts, resource optimization, and community partnerships, which always meant doing more with less. The park was short-staffed, so Ethan was the one who checked the bathrooms, cleared fallen branches, reminded teenagers that yes, vaping still counted as smoking in a state park, and answered tourists who asked if bears were, like, a real thing here. He kept his Starbucks cup in the truck's cup holder even after it went cold, like having it there proved he was normal. Like someone who didn't heat up leftover spaghetti at 1 a.m. and eat it standing at the kitchen counter because he didn't want to sit in the quiet. The divorce papers had been final for 8 months, but the reality of it still showed up in small ways, like a bruise you kept bumping. The spare toothbrush at the sink that was now only his. The calendar reminder that said, Mila, dentist, on a week he didn't even have Mila. The way his ex, Kara, texted him in short bursts like a coworker instead of the person who used to know the exact spot on his back that always ached. He tried not to resent her. He really did. Kara had gotten a new job in Seattle, better pay, better health insurance, a commute that wasn't a 2-lane highway lined with Christmas tree farms. Ethan stayed because the park job was stable, because Mila's school was here, because moving felt like admitting he didn't know how to build a life without a map. That morning started like 100 other mornings. Rain misting the windshield. The radio low. His phone lighting up with notifications that weren't urgent but still made him feel behind. A message from Kara, Mila has a cough. Just letting you know. Then another, can you switch next weekend? Work thing. Ethan stared at the second message at a stop sign longer than he should have. He could hear Mila's laugh in his head, that bright sound that made him feel like a good dad for a second, and then the worry slid right in underneath it. A cough in winter could be nothing. Or it could be a clinic bill. Or it could be a night of Mila waking up and asking for her mom, and Ethan pretending his throat didn't tighten. He texted back, yeah, I can switch. He drove into the park and did his usual loop. Trailhead check. Trash cans. A quick wave to an older man who power-walked every day in neon gear like it was his job. The smell of wet cedar followed Ethan everywhere, mixed with car exhaust and damp jackets. Around mid-morning, dispatch pinged him about a complaint. Someone had reported possible illegal camping near the North Ridge Trail. Ethan knew what that meant. Sometimes it was tourists who tried to save money and got creative. Sometimes it was local teenagers hiding beer. Lately, more often, it was someone who didn't have a safer place to be. He hated that part. Not because he didn't understand. Because he did. He parked the truck and walked in, boots sinking slightly into mud. His jacket made that soft swish sound with every step. The woods were quiet except for rain tapping leaves and the occasional crow. He followed the trail until he saw it, the oak. It was huge, older than most things in Ethan's life. The trunk was wide enough that two people couldn't reach around it. The roots rose like knuckles out of the ground. From a distance, it looked solid and stubborn. Up close, Ethan saw the small signs. A flattened patch of leaves that didn't match the rest. A piece of cardboard tucked under a root like a doormat. A faint smell, not trash, not rot, but the mix of human things: soap, sweat, cheap laundry detergent. He crouched and brushed aside wet leaves. There was an opening, narrow but real, like a mouth half hidden by bark. Somebody had lined the inside with a dark tarp and packed mud around the edges to keep the draft out. A plastic tote sat just inside, lid snapped tight. A thin strip of battery-powered fairy lights, dollar store kind, ran along the inner curve of the hollow. Ethan's stomach tightened. The oak wasn't just a tree. It was a shelter. His radio crackled, startling him. "Unit 3, you copy?" He pressed the button but didn't speak right away. His throat felt dry even in the rain. "Unit 3. I'm here," Ethan said, voice low. "I found something." He stared into the dark. He didn't want to announce himself like a cop. He didn't want to sound like a threat. But he also couldn't just walk away. There were rules. Liability. The kind of emails that came after. He cleared his throat and spoke toward the opening. "Hey, park ranger. I'm not here to scare you." Silence, then a soft shift, like someone sitting up slowly. A woman's face appeared in the dim. Mid-40s, maybe. Hair pulled back with a rubber band. Cheeks tired. She wasn't dirty in the way people expected someone like her to be. Just worn down, like she'd been bracing against the world for too long. Her eyes flicked to his uniform, then to his hands, like she was checking for something. Ethan made sure his palms were open and visible. She swallowed. "You found my spot." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of everything he was supposed to do press down on him. He thought about Mila's cough. Kara's text. The rent increase notice that had come last month. And the fact that this woman was living inside a tree because the world had run out of decent corners for people. "I did," he said. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then said, "Nora." Ethan heard his phone buzz again, persistent, and didn't look at it. He kept his eyes on hers instead, because for some reason, that felt like the more urgent thing. "Nora," he repeated, slow. "Can we talk for a minute? Just, right here. No drama." Nora's shoulders lowered a fraction, like her body wanted to believe him but didn't know how. "Okay," she said. "But I'm not leaving today." Ethan swallowed, the rules and the human part of him pulling in opposite directions. "Let's just talk," he said again, softer this time. "Then we'll figure out what's real." And for the first time all morning, Ethan felt like his job wasn't just to protect the park. It was to decide what kind of person he was going to be inside it. Ethan sat on a fallen log a few feet from the oak, rain tapping softly on his hood. He'd radioed dispatch with a vague update about checking a situation, and bought himself some time. Not much, but enough to breathe. Nora crawled out slowly, careful with her knees, pulling a faded hoodie tighter around herself. She slipped on worn sneakers that had seen too many miles. When she stood, she leaned a hand against the oak like it was something solid she trusted more than the ground. Up close, Ethan noticed the small things. Her hands were clean but cracked. There was a neatness to her movements, like she didn't waste energy. She smelled faintly of soap, the cheap kind you get in bulk. They stood there for a moment, neither sure who should speak next. The woods felt different now. Less like scenery, more like a room with walls that could hear. "You alone out here?" Ethan asked. Nora nodded. Most of the time. Most of the time, stuck with him. "Anyone else know you're here?" She shrugged. "Couple people pass through. Nobody stays." Ethan rubbed his palms on his pants, a habit he had when he was trying not to say the wrong thing. "How long?" 3 months, she said. "Before that, my car." He pictured her sleeping in a driver's seat, knees bent, waking up to knocks on the window. He'd seen it before. He hated how familiar it all was becoming. "There's a warming shelter in town," he said, automatically. "And a couple of programs." "I know," she said, not rude, just tired. "I've been on the lists. You ever call a number and just hear hold music until the battery dies?" Ethan nodded before he could stop himself. He thought of calling insurance about Mila's dental coverage last year. 47 minutes on hold. He'd sat on the floor, phone on speaker, staring at a crack in the wall like it was a clock. Nora glanced back at the oak. "This place doesn't ask questions." "That tree's protected," Ethan said quietly. "Old growth. If someone reports damage." "I haven't hurt it," she said quickly. "I swear. I patted the inside. No nails. No fire. Just lights and a stove I use outside." She paused, then added, "I like trees. Always have." Something in her voice made Ethan believe her. Not blind trust. Just the sense that she'd thought about it, that she'd tried not to take more than she needed. He checked his phone then, finally. 2 missed calls. A voicemail from Kara. Probably about Mila's cough. Probably nothing he could fix from the woods anyway. "What did you do before?" he asked. Nora looked at him, surprised by the question. "You mean before this?" "Yeah." She thought for a second. "I worked at a print shop. Layout. Proofing. Got laid off when they downsized. I did some temp stuff. Then my mom got sick. I moved in to help her. When she passed." Her voice caught, just for a beat. "The lease wasn't in my name." Ethan felt that familiar tightness in his chest, the one that came when life didn't explode, just quietly slid sideways until you couldn't get your footing back. "I'm sorry," he said. She nodded, accepting it without drama. "I had savings. They went fast." Rain picked up, heavier now, dotting Nora's shoulders. Ethan pulled his extra poncho from his pack and held it out. She hesitated, pride flashing across her face, then took it. "Thanks," she said. "I'll give it back." "No rush," he said. "I've got another in the truck." She slipped it on, exhaling like the warmth mattered more than she expected. That small moment landed between them, heavier than it should have. Ethan glanced at the oak again. "You know I can't just ignore this." "I know," Nora said. "I'm not pretending otherwise." They stood there, rain filling the silence. Ethan thought about the rules, the emails, the liability forms. He thought about Mila sleeping on Kara's couch, coughing softly, and how he hated that he wasn't there. "There's a woman who runs the coffee stand by the ferry," Ethan said slowly. "Her name's Linda. She lets people sit inside when it's cold, even if they don't buy much. She knows everyone. She might know a place with an opening. Not a promise. Just information." Nora studied his face, like she was deciding whether this was hope or another dead end. "You don't have to do that." "I know. But you're offering anyway." "Yeah." She nodded once. "Okay." Ethan felt something shift inside him, small but real. Not a solution. Just a crack where light might get in. "I'll come back tomorrow morning," he said. "Same time. We'll talk again. Figure out next steps." "And today?" she asked. Ethan looked at the oak, at the careful way she'd made space without tearing anything down. He took a breath. "Today," he said. "I didn't see anything urgent." Nora's shoulders sagged, relief written all over her face in a way she didn't bother to hide. "Thank you." Ethan stood, adjusting his jacket. "This isn't me fixing things," he said. "Just giving them room." "That's more than most people do," she said. As he walked back toward his truck, rain soaking his boots, Ethan felt the familiar weight of his life still there. The bills. The texts. The uncertainty. But underneath it all was something new. Not hope exactly. More like the memory of it. His phone buzzed again. He answered this time. "Mila's okay," Kara said. "Just a cold." Ethan closed his eyes, relief washing through him. Thanks for telling me. He hung up and sat in the truck for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, breathing. Outside, the forest kept being what it was. Inside, something had shifted, quiet and fragile. And for the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel completely alone with it. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. He lay on his back staring at the ceiling fan in his rental, listening to it click faintly every time it turned. The sound was new. He'd noticed it a week ago and now couldn't stop hearing it, like once you saw a crack in a wall, it kept spreading even if it wasn't. He kept thinking about Nora's voice inside the oak. Not dramatic. Not pleading. Just steady, like someone who'd learned not to expect rescue. Around 2 in the morning, he got up and checked his phone. No new messages. He opened his banking app anyway, a habit he hated. Numbers stared back at him, neutral and unforgiving. Rent due in 10 days. Mila's birthday coming up. The credit card balance that never seemed to shrink no matter how careful he was. He thought about how close his own life felt to tipping, how thin the line was between barely managing and not managing at all. He wondered if Nora had ever thought the same thing, right before her savings ran out. At work the next morning, his supervisor pulled him aside near the maintenance shed. Greg was a decent guy, mid-50s, always smelled faintly of peppermint gum. He leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. Got a call yesterday, Greg said. About North Ridge. Ethan's stomach tightened. Yeah, I was checking it out. Some hiker saw movement near that oak, Greg said. Said it looked occupied. Ethan nodded. There was no point pretending. It is. Greg sighed, rubbing his face. Look, I don't love this. But you know the policy. If word gets out that people are living in old growth trees, we're gonna have a mess. Safety issues. Media. I know, Ethan said. And he did. He really did. Greg softened a little. You got a plan? Ethan hesitated. That pause said more than he wanted it to. Ethan, Greg said gently, you can care. Just don't let caring wreck you. Ethan thought about that all morning. He did his rounds on autopilot, nodding at visitors, answering the same questions. The park felt louder than usual, every sound sharper. A kid crying over a scraped knee. A couple arguing quietly near the restrooms. A dog barking non-stop, tied to a picnic table. By the time his shift ended, his chest felt tight, like he'd been holding his breath all day. He drove straight back to the oak. Nora was outside this time, sitting on a flat rock, tying and untying the laces of her shoes. She looked up when she saw his truck and stood quickly, nervous energy flashing across her face. You came back, she said. I said I would. She smiled, small and cautious. People say things. Ethan nodded. Yeah, they do. They walked a little away from the tree, giving it space, like it was a third person in the conversation. Ethan told her about the complaint, about the reality that someone else might come soon who wouldn't be as patient. Nora listened without interrupting, eyes fixed on the ground. When he finished, she let out a long breath. So that's it, she said. Not angry. Just resigned. I had a feeling. It doesn't have to be today, Ethan said. But it can't stay like this forever. She laughed quietly, a sound with no humor in it. Nothing ever does. They stood there, the weight of it settling between them. Ethan felt something twist inside him, sharp and uncomfortable. This was the part he hated. The part where kindness met reality and didn't win. I went to that coffee stand you mentioned, Nora said. Linda's nice. She remembered my name. That helped more than she probably knows. She paused. No openings yet. I'm sorry, Ethan said again, and this time the word felt thin. Nora looked up at him then, really looked at him. Can I ask you something? Yeah. Why are you doing this? She asked. Most people just tell me where to go and walk away. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. The honest answer surprised him when it came out. Because I'm scared, he said. She blinked. Of what? Of pretending this can't happen to me, he said. Of thinking I'm different somehow. Better prepared. 1 bad year away. He shook his head. I don't want to lie to myself anymore. Nora studied him, her expression softening. That's a heavy thing to carry. So is what you're carrying, he said. The words hung there, fragile. Later, as Ethan walked back to his truck, his phone rang. Kara again. Mila's fever spiked, she said, worry clear in her voice now. We're at urgent care. Ethan felt the world narrow to that sentence. Is she okay? They're checking her. Can you come? He didn't hesitate. He drove faster than he should have, rain streaking the windshield, thoughts spiraling. The hospital waiting room smelled like disinfectant and old coffee. Mila sat on Kara's lap, pale but smiling when she saw him. Daddy, she said, voice small. He held her hand, feeling how warm it was, how real. He thought about Nora alone in the woods, about the oak standing silent and steady. Later, when Mila fell asleep, Ethan stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall. His hands were shaking. He realized then what the breaking point really was. Not Nora's situation. Not the park's rules. It was the understanding that he couldn't save everyone, and that trying to might cost him the people who depended on him most. On the drive home, exhaustion settled into his bones. He pulled over once, just to breathe, forehead resting on the steering wheel. I'm doing my best, he whispered, to no one. And for the first time, he wasn't sure if that was enough. The morning came gray and slow, like it was giving everyone time to catch up with themselves. Ethan woke up on the couch at Kara's place, his neck stiff, his phone half charged on the floor. Mila was still asleep in her room, the fever finally down, her breathing even. The doctor had said it was just a rough virus. Rest. Fluids. Time. Ethan thought about how often people said that like it was free. He stepped outside with a mug of coffee that tasted burnt and stood on the small concrete porch, watching cars pass. Commuters. Nurses. People with places to be. He checked his phone. No messages from work yet. No new updates from Nora either, though he hadn't really expected any. By mid-morning, Mila was awake and asking for cereal. She joked about the hospital wristband still on her arm, asked if it made her look official. Ethan smiled more easily than he had in days. When Kara thanked him for coming so fast, he nodded and said, of course, like there was never any question. But there had been. And that truth sat quietly with him as he drove back toward the park later that afternoon. He parked farther away this time and walked in. The woods felt unchanged, which was comforting in a way that almost hurt. The oak stood where it always had, broad and patient. Nora was packing. She had laid her things out neatly on a tarp. The plastic tote. A folded blanket. The fairy lights coiled carefully like something worth saving. When she saw Ethan, she paused, then went back to folding. I figured it out, she said, before he could ask. Someone tipped off a volunteer from the outreach van. They came by this morning. Ethan felt a mix of relief and guilt wash through him. And I got a bed, she said. Temporary. Church basement. Curfew. Rules. She shrugged. Not perfect. But it's inside. That's good, Ethan said, meaning it. She nodded. I can't stay here anymore anyway. Too many eyes. They stood together in the quiet, the sound of leaves shifting overhead. Ethan noticed the way the oak looked now that the entrance was open and empty. Just a tree again. Still impressive. Still alive. I'm sorry I couldn't do more, Ethan said. Nora looked at him, really looked at him, the same way she had before. You did enough, she said. You treated me like I was still a person. The words landed harder than he expected. He swallowed. I hope it helps. It already did, she said. When things fall apart, it matters who sees you. A volunteer van pulled up on the access road, older and dented, engine idling rough. Nora picked up her tote and slung it over her shoulder. She hesitated, then held out the poncho. "Keep it," Ethan said. "I've got another." She smiled, tired but real. "Okay." Before she turned to go, she tapped the oak lightly with her knuckles, almost like a goodbye. Then she walked toward the van without looking back. Ethan stayed until it disappeared down the road. Back at work the next day, Greg nodded at him in the hallway. "Heard the situation resolved itself." Ethan nodded. "For now." Greg paused. "You okay?" Ethan thought about the question. About the thin line he walked every day. About Mila's laugh. About Nora's quiet strength. About the fact that nothing had been fixed in a big, satisfying way. "I think so," he said. "I think I'm learning." That night, after Mila went to bed at his place, Ethan sat at the kitchen table and paid bills slowly, carefully. He didn't avoid the numbers this time. He made a small plan. Nothing dramatic. Just steps. Before he went to sleep, he opened his phone and typed a note to himself, something he'd learned the hard way but didn't want to forget. Being strong doesn't mean carrying everything alone. Sometimes it just means not turning away. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, steady and unremarkable. Somewhere, Nora was adjusting to a new room, a new set of rules, a new version of hope that didn't ask too much all at once. And Ethan, lying in the dark, felt something settle in his chest. Not happiness. Not certainty. But a quiet sense that even in a world that didn't offer clean endings, small choices still mattered. And sometimes, that was enough to keep going. If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. Life rarely changes all at once, but small moments of empathy can change the direction. If you've ever stood at a crossroads like Ethan or Nora, your story matters too.